All stories posted on our channel are stories from our subscribers and created by us based on real events we've experienced and witnessed. We post new stories every day for your entertainment, that we hope you enjoy them. Thank you.
The comparison came out of nowhere, like most things that destroy marriages. We were standing in the kitchen of our home in Charlotte, North Carolina, arguing about a leaking faucet that had been dripping for 3 weeks. It was a Saturday morning in March, the kind of gray, drizzly day that makes everything feel heavier than it should. I'd promised to fix the faucet, had been promising for weeks, but between my job as a logistics manager at a distribution company and the general exhaustion of daily life, I hadn't gotten around to it. "I'll call a plumber on Monday," I said, pouring myself coffee. "It's not a big deal." My wife, Ramona, was leaning against the counter with her arms crossed, her expression caught somewhere between frustration and something darker. We'd been married for 8 years, together for 10, and I'd learned to read her moods with the precision of someone who'd survived countless storms. This one was building towards something I hadn't anticipated, something that would change everything. You always say that. You'll call someone, you'll hire someone, you'll pay someone else to do what you should be doing yourself. It's a faucet, Ramona, not a moral failing. It's not just the faucet. It's the gutters you never cleaned, the fence you never repaired, the garage door that's been squeaking for 6 months. She shook her head, and I saw something shift in her expression, a cruelty I hadn't seen before, or maybe had been refusing to see. You know what? Gage did everything himself. Everything. He never hired anyone for anything because he actually knew how to use his hands. I set down my coffee cup very carefully. Gage was her ex-boyfriend from before we met. They'd dated for 2 years in their mid-20s, and from what Ramona had told me, it had ended badly. He'd cheated on her with a co-worker, and she'd left him. But in the decades since, he'd apparently been transformed in her memory into some kind of paragon of masculine capability. A man who could build things, fix things, create things with his bare hands, while I apparently fumbled through life hiring professionals like some kind of incompetent aristocrat. Did you just compare me to your ex? I'm stating a fact. He could fix things, build things. He renovated his entire basement by himself. Built a deck from scratch, changed his own oil, repaired his own appliances. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Meanwhile, you can't even hang a picture without making 3 holes in the wall. And he also slept with someone else while you were together. But sure, let's focus on the basement. That's not... She stopped, took a breath that seemed designed to communicate how unreasonable I was being. I'm not saying he was a better partner. I'm saying he was more capable, more self-sufficient, unlike you, who can't even change a tire without calling ADAA. The words hung in the air between us, ugly and deliberate. I'd changed plenty of tires in my life, actually. Had grown up on a farm in rural Virginia where you learned to fix things or did without. But somewhere in my marriage to Ramona, I'd stopped trying to prove myself. I'd focused on providing instead, working long hours, earning promotions, building the career that paid for this house, her car, the vacations she posted about on social media. None of that seemed to matter now. "Is that really what you think of me?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "That I'm less of a man because I hire plumbers? I think you've gotten comfortable, lazy. You don't challenge yourself anymore." She picked up her phone, started scrolling, a dismissive gesture I'd become familiar with over the years. "Gage would have had that faucet fixed in 20 minutes, but you'll probably forget to call the plumber by Tuesday." I stood there for a long moment, coffee cooling in my cup, watching my wife scroll through whatever was more interesting than our conversation. Something was crystallizing inside me. Not anger exactly, but clarity. The kind of cold, sharp recognition that comes when you finally see a pattern you've been ignoring for years. "You talk to him, don't you?" I said. "Gage." Her thumb stopped moving. "What? You've been in contact with him. That's why you're suddenly bringing him up, comparing him to me. Because he's not just a memory anymore. He's present. That's ridiculous. Is it? Because this is the 3rd time in 2 months you've mentioned him. And you never used to talk about him at all. I set down my cup. So either you're reconnecting with your ex, or you've been thinking about him obsessively. Neither option is great for our marriage. Ramona finally looked up from her phone, but her expression wasn't guilty. It was defiant. We've been texting, so what? He reached out a few months ago, just catching up. It's harmless. Harmless. You're texting your ex-boyfriend, the one you apparently wish you'd married instead of me, and you think that's harmless. I didn't say I wish I'd married him. You said he does everything himself. Unlike me. That's not a neutral comparison, Ramona. That's longing. She stood up straighter, her defensiveness shifting into offense. You're being paranoid. Gage and I are friends. Adults can be friends with their exes without it meaning anything. Adults can also be honest with their spouses about those friendships. How long have you been texting him? The pause before she answered told me everything. A few months. How many? I don't know. Since October, maybe. October. 5 months of secret communication with an ex-boyfriend while I worked 60-hour weeks to keep our life running. 5 months of comparisons being drawn, apparently, while I remained oblivious. I think I need some air, I said. Fletcher, don't be dramatic. I'm not being dramatic. I'm being realistic. I grabbed my jacket from the hook by the door. You've been texting your ex for 5 months without telling me, and when I ask about it, your response is to tell me how much better he is at fixing things. That's not a foundation for a productive conversation. I walked out before she could respond. The drive to nowhere took me through the grey streets of Charlotte, past the neighbourhoods we'd considered buying in before settling on ours, past the restaurants where we'd celebrated anniversaries, and the park where I'd proposed. 8 years of shared geography, now tainted by the knowledge that my wife had been building something separate, something that didn't include me. I ended up at a coffee shop in Noda, the arts district we used to visit when we were dating. It was the kind of place that attracted writers and remote workers, people hunched over laptops with headphones in, lost in their own private worlds. I ordered a black coffee I didn't want and found a seat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. What hurt most wasn't the comparison itself. It was the realization that Ramona had been keeping score, measuring me against someone from her past, finding me wanting, and sharing that assessment with the person I was being measured against. What had she told Gage about me? What complaints had she aired? What disappointments had she catalogued? What intimate failures had she disclosed to a man who'd once been inside her? The thought made me sick. I pulled out my phone and did something I'd never done before. I searched for Gage Holloway on social media. Gage Holloway had the kind of online presence that suggested someone who wanted to be seen. His Instagram was public, filled with photos of woodworking projects and home renovations and the occasional gym selfie. He was good-looking in an obvious way, square jaw, broad shoulders, the weathered handsomeness of a man who worked with his hands. His bio described him as a custom furniture maker and renovation specialist, with a link to a business website that showcased his work. The furniture was impressive, I had to admit. Clean lines, quality materials, the kind of craftsmanship that justified premium prices. His renovation portfolio showed before and after transformations of kitchens and bathrooms, decks and basements. He was talented, genuinely talented, and he'd built a business around that talent. But as I scrolled deeper, I noticed something else. There were no photos of a partner, no ring on his finger, no indication of any relationship status at all, just the solitary life of a craftsman and his work. He was single, and he was talking to my wife. I found myself clicking through to his Facebook profile, which was more revealing. Posts about projects and clients, yes, but also complaints about dating apps, vague references to past relationships that didn't work out, and there it was, a comment from Ramona on a photo from 3 months ago. This is beautiful work. You've really developed your craft. His response, thanks, Mona, means a lot coming from you. We should catch up sometime, grab coffee or something. Her response, I'd like that. Mona. He called her Mona. I'd never called her that, had never known she'd been called that by anyone. It was an intimacy I hadn't been invited to share, a private name from a private history that apparently still mattered. I kept scrolling, more comments, more interactions, a pattern of engagement that suggested regular communication beyond what appeared publicly. She liked his posts. He liked hers. They existed in each other's digital lives in ways that weren't quite inappropriate, but weren't quite innocent either. And then I found the photo. It was from 2 weeks ago, a coffee shop in Uptown. Gage sitting at a table with his woodworking portfolio spread out in front of him. The caption read, "Meeting with a potential client. Love when people appreciate real craftsmanship." In the background, barely visible but unmistakably present, was Ramona. She was sitting at a different table, facing away from the camera, but I recognized the jacket she'd bought last month, the way she held her coffee cup, the particular angle of her shoulders when she was engaged in conversation. They'd met, in person. 2 weeks ago, while I was at work, my wife had met her ex-boyfriend for what was apparently more than just texting. I sat with that photo for a long time, zooming in, analyzing, making sure I wasn't seeing something that wasn't there. But it was her. It was definitely her. The question was what to do with this information. I could confront her, show her the photo, demand an explanation, initiate the kind of dramatic scene that would either end our marriage or force it into crisis therapy. That was the obvious move, the emotional move, the one that years of movie watching had conditioned me to believe was appropriate. But something held me back. If I confronted her now, with what little I knew, she'd have room to explain it away. A coincidence, a chance encounter, a meeting that was purely professional. Maybe she was actually looking at his furniture for some reason, considering a purchase, exploring options for the house. The explanations would be available, and I'd be cast as the paranoid husband who made something out of nothing. No. If I was going to understand what was really happening in my marriage, I needed more than one photo and a feeling. I needed evidence. The decision to investigate my own wife felt like a betrayal, even as I made it. We were supposed to trust each other. That was the foundation of marriage, the implicit promise beneath all the explicit ones. By choosing to dig instead of ask, I was acknowledging that trust had already failed. But hadn't it? Ramona had been texting her ex for 5 months without telling me, had met him in person at least once, possibly more, had compared me to him in terms that suggested she found me lacking. Whatever trust had existed between us, she'd been eroding it for months while I remained oblivious. I was just catching up. I drove home that afternoon with a plan forming in my mind. I wouldn't confront her about the photo. Not yet. I would be calm, apologetic, the reasonable husband who'd overreacted to a simple friendship. I would give her room to continue whatever she was doing while I watched, waited, and gathered the information I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. It was manipulative. It was deceptive. It was exactly the kind of thing I'd always believed I wasn't capable of. But my wife had taught me something important that morning. I didn't know what I was capable of until I was pushed far enough. The weeks that followed were an exercise in controlled observation. I apologized to Ramona when I got home that Saturday. Not a groveling apology, but a measured acknowledgement that I'd overreacted. Yes, I said, she was entitled to friendships. Yes, I'd been neglecting things around the house. Yes, I could see why she might be frustrated. I'd do better. I'd be more present. I'd try to be the husband she deserved. She accepted the apology with the satisfied grace of someone who'd won an argument. The texting with Gage, she assured me, was completely innocent, just 2 old friends reconnecting, nothing more. She'd be happy to show me the messages if I wanted, though her tone suggested I'd be petty and paranoid if I took her up on the offer. I declined, said I trusted her, watched her smile with relief that had too much pleasure in it. And then I started paying attention. The phone habits were the most obvious tell. Ramona had never been secretive about her device before, would leave it on tables, hand it to me to show photos, text in plain view without concern. Now, the phone was always face down or in her pocket. She'd angle away slightly when typing. She'd pause conversations to respond to messages she claimed were from co-workers or her sister. The co-workers and sister excuse was particularly transparent because I started tracking the timing. She'd claim a text was from her sister Yolanda at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday, but when I casually mentioned Yolanda in conversation the next day, "How's her new job going?" Ramona would look confused, as if she'd forgotten the cover story she'd deployed 12 hours earlier. The small lies accumulated. A work event that kept her late on a Thursday, except when I drove past her office that evening, her car wasn't in the lot. A girls' night with friends that extended past midnight, except when I checked our joint credit card statement. There were no charges to restaurants or bars that evening, just a suspicious gap where spending should have been. I wasn't proud of the surveillance. It felt dirty, suspicious, exactly the kind of behavior that would make me the villain if discovered. But I was learning something important about the woman I'd married, and that knowledge felt necessary even as it poisoned me. 3 weeks into my observation, I made a decision. I'd been so focused on what Ramona was doing that I'd neglected to think about who I was becoming. The suspicious husband, checking statements and tracking locations, building a case like some kind of domestic prosecutor. That wasn't the person I wanted to be, regardless of what my wife was doing. If my marriage was ending, and it increasingly seemed like it was, I wanted to end it on my own terms, not as the victim of betrayal, not as the paranoid spouse who'd been driven to surveillance, but as someone who'd seen the truth and chosen to respond with dignity. That meant I needed to stop watching and start acting. The first step was obvious. I needed to become the man Ramona claimed to want. Not for her, that ship had sailed, but for myself. If her criticism was that I couldn't do things with my hands, couldn't fix or build or create, then I would address that criticism directly, not to win her back, but to prove something to myself. I'd grown up on a farm. I knew how to work. I'd just gotten comfortable, as she'd said, letting money solve problems that effort could handle. It was time to remember who I'd been before success made me soft. The hardware store in Southend became my new weekend destination. I bought tools, real tools, not the cheap kit I'd received as a housewarming gift years ago. A quality drill, a circular saw, hand tools with solid construction and comfortable grips. I bought lumber and brackets and screws, materials for projects I was only beginning to imagine, and I started working. The leaking faucet was first. It took me 2 hours and 3 YouTube videos, but I fixed it. The dripping stopped. The handle no longer wobbled. When I ran the water, and it flowed cleanly, without the constant drip, drip, drip that had been driving Ramona crazy, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pride in physical accomplishment. The gutters came next. I rented a ladder. Spent a Saturday afternoon clearing debris, realized the downspout connection was failing, and replaced it myself. The work was dirty and tedious, but when I stepped back and saw clean gutters channeling water properly for the first time in months, I understood what Ramona had been talking about. There was satisfaction in this, in solving problems with your hands instead of your wallet, in looking at something broken and making it whole through effort rather than delegation. I wasn't doing it for her anymore. I was doing it for the person I'd forgotten I could be. Ramona noticed the changes, of course. "You fixed the faucet," she said, with surprise that bordered on disbelief. "I did. And the gutters? Cleaned and repaired." She studied me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What's gotten into you?" "I've been thinking about what you said, about being more self-sufficient." I shrugged. "You weren't wrong. I had gotten comfortable. But that doesn't mean I can't change." "Fletcher," she paused, something flickering across her face. Guilt? Confusion? I couldn't tell. "You don't have to prove anything to me." "I'm not proving anything to you. I'm proving something to myself." The conversation ended there, but I caught her watching me differently over the following days, more carefully, as if I'd become unpredictable, someone she needed to observe rather than dismiss. Good. Let her observe. Let her wonder. Because while I was fixing faucets and cleaning gutters, I was also planning something bigger, something that would change everything. The idea came to me on a Sunday morning while I was pricing materials for a deck repair that had been on my list for years. Our house had an unfinished basement, 2,000 square feet of concrete and exposed ductwork that we'd always intended to develop, but never prioritized. Ramona had mentioned it once, early in our marriage, as a potential home gym or entertainment space. I'd nodded and promptly forgot about it, too focused on work to consider a project of that magnitude. But Ramona had also mentioned, during our kitchen argument, that Gage had renovated his entire basement by himself. It was one of her specific examples of his superior capability, his masculine competence, his ability to create something substantial through personal effort. What if I did the same thing? Not to prove anything to her. That motivation had faded as my suspicions about her relationship with Gage had grown, but to prove something to myself. To demonstrate, concretely and undeniably, that I was capable of more than I'd been showing. To transform an empty space into something valuable through nothing but my own effort and determination. The project would be massive. I'd never done anything like it before. Had barely touched power tools before these recent weeks of repair work. But I had something more important than experience. I had time, I had resources, and I had the particular kind of motivation that comes from having everything you believed about your life called into question. I spent the following week researching. YouTube became my university, offering tutorials on everything from framing walls to running electrical to installing drywall. I bought books on home renovation, studied building codes for Charlotte, reached out to the city's permitting office to understand what approvals I'd need for the work I was planning. The scope crystallized. I would transform our unfinished basement into a complete living space, a home theater area with built-in shelving, a workout space with rubber flooring, a wet bar with custom cabinetry. And most ambitiously, a full bathroom with shower, the most complex plumbing challenge the project would present. The timeline I set for myself was 6 months. Aggressive, probably unrealistic, but I needed a goal that would push me, something that demanded complete commitment. Ramona noticed the research materials accumulating in my home office, the books, the printouts, the sketched floor plans I was developing. "What's all this?" she asked one evening, flipping through my notes. "A project. I'm going to finish the basement," she laughed. "You finish the basement. Me. Fletcher, that's a major renovation. You'd need contractors, permits, probably an architect. I'm going to do it myself." The laughter stopped. She studied me with that new expression, the one that suggested I'd become strange and unfamiliar. "That's insane. You've never done anything like that before." "I've never tried. There's a difference. This isn't like fixing a faucet. This is months of work, thousands of dollars, skills you don't have. Skills can be learned. Fletcher, I'm doing this, Ramona, with or without your support." I held her gaze, though I suspect I know which one it will be. Something passed between us in that moment. An acknowledgement that we weren't really talking about the basement at all. We were talking about capability, about potential, about whether the man she'd married could become something more than she'd assumed. "Fine," she said finally. "It's your time to waste. We'll see." The demolition started on a Saturday in April. The basement had accumulated years of forgotten storage, boxes of old clothes, broken furniture, equipment from hobbies neither of us pursued anymore. I spent the first weekend just clearing the space, hauling load after load to donation centers and the dump, revealing the bare concrete canvas I'd be working with. The scope of what I'd undertaken became real in that empty space. 2,000 square feet of possibility, bounded by concrete walls and overhead joists, waiting to be transformed into something livable. I stood in the center and felt for the first time genuine doubt about whether I could do this. But doubt wasn't the same as inability. I'd learned that on the farm, during long days of work that seemed impossible until you started moving and discovered that motion created momentum, that effort compounded into progress, that the only way to do something massive was one small step at a time. I started with framing. The walls went up slowly at first. I was learning as I went, making mistakes, tearing down and rebuilding when I got the spacing wrong or the corners uneven. But each wall taught me something about the next one. By the second weekend, I was working faster. By the third, I could frame a section in a fraction of the time it had taken initially. The transformation was visible now. Where there had been empty concrete, there were now the skeletal outlines of rooms, the theater space, the gym area, the bathroom that would require the most careful work. Ramona would come downstairs occasionally, observe my progress with an expression I couldn't read, and leave without commenting. She was spending more time away from home now. Work events, she claimed. Meetings with clients. The explanations had become perfunctory, barely bothered with, as if she'd stopped caring whether I believed them. I didn't believe them, but I was too focused on my project to confront the obvious. The electrical work required my first outside help. I could have hired an electrician to do everything. The wiring, the panel upgrade, the inspection, but that would have defeated the purpose. Instead, I hired one to consult, to teach me what I needed to know while I did the actual work myself. His name was Cornelius, a retired electrician who ran a small consulting business helping homeowners with DIY projects. He was in his 60s, gruff and skeptical at first, but his attitude shifted when he saw my framing work and realized I was serious about learning. Most people who say they want to learn, they really want me to do it while they watch, he said during our first session. But you actually want to understand this stuff. I need to. This is important to me. Why? You could afford to hire professionals. I looked up your address. This isn't exactly a starter home. I considered how to answer. The truth was complicated, tied up with my marriage and my wife, and the need to prove something I couldn't quite articulate. Someone told me I was incapable, I said finally. That I didn't know how to do things, couldn't learn, would always need to hire someone else to solve my problems. Cornelius nodded slowly. And you're going to show them different. I'm going to show myself different. What they think doesn't matter anymore. He studied me for a moment, some kind of recognition passing through his weathered features. Let's get to work then. The plumbing was my nemesis. Where framing and electrical had been logical, follow the diagrams, respect the codes, apply the principles, plumbing seemed to operate on intuition I didn't possess. My first attempt at the bathroom rough-in resulted in a leak that flooded half the basement. My second attempt held pressure but failed inspection because I'd misunderstood the venting requirements. I was 3 months into the project, exhausted and frustrated, seriously considering hiring a plumber to finish what I'd started, when I made the discovery that changed everything. Ramona had been out late again, a work dinner that extended past midnight. I'd stopped pretending to believe her excuses weeks ago, but I also hadn't confronted her, too absorbed in my project to face the parallel crisis in my marriage. But that night, after she came home and went straight to bed without acknowledging me, I found myself unable to sleep. I went downstairs to the basement, thinking I might do some work, and found her phone on the kitchen counter. She'd left it there. Unusual. She'd been guarding it carefully for months. I should have walked past it. Should have continued to the basement, focused on my plumbing problem, let whatever was happening between my wife and her ex remain in the darkness where she'd hidden it. I picked up the phone. The passcode was our anniversary. She'd never changed it, despite all her other precautions. The text messages were right there, at the top of her recent conversations. Not with Gage. She'd renamed him Work Client in her contacts, a pathetic attempt at camouflage that made my stomach turn. I scrolled through months of conversation. The early messages were almost innocent, catching up, reminiscing, the kind of nostalgic exchange that might genuinely be harmless between old friends. But somewhere around November, the tone had shifted. Inside jokes, flirtatious observations, references to their past relationship that lingered on physical details. And then, in January, the explicit content began. I won't reproduce what I read. The details don't matter, and they live in my memory regardless. Images and descriptions that burned themselves into my consciousness, impossible to unsee. What matters is the conclusion they forced upon me. My wife had been having an affair. Not an emotional connection, not a flirtation that had gotten out of hand. A full physical relationship with her ex-boyfriend, conducted for months while I worked on the basement, oblivious and pathetic. The most recent message was from earlier that evening. Tonight was perfect. I can't wait until we don't have to sneak around anymore. Soon, right? Her response, soon. Just have to figure out the logistics. He's so clueless he won't see it coming. Clueless. That's what she thought of me. The husband who worked 60 hours a week to support her lifestyle, who'd started renovating the basement to become someone better, who'd been trying so hard to salvage a marriage she'd already destroyed. I set down the phone exactly where I'd found it, went to the basement, stared at the unfinished plumbing that had been frustrating me for weeks, and I made a decision. The easy thing would have been to confront her immediately, to wake her up, show her the messages, demand explanations that would become justifications, watch our marriage dissolve into recriminations and blame. I'd be within my rights. No reasonable person could fault me for reacting to betrayal with confrontation, but I wasn't interested in the easy thing anymore. Ramona thought I was clueless, thought I wouldn't see it coming. She'd been making plans behind my back, calculating logistics, preparing to leave me for a man who could build furniture and renovate basements. Skills I was actively developing. Ironically enough, if she wanted a surprise, I'd give her one, but it would be on my terms, not hers. The plan came together over the following days, assembled in the basement between sessions of plumbing work that I attacked with renewed determination. The frustration that had been blocking me seemed to dissolve, replaced by a cold clarity that made the technical challenges manageable. First, I would finish the basement. The project was about 2/3 complete. With focused effort, I could be done in 8 weeks. The space would be my evidence, proof of what I could do, what I'd been capable of all along, what she'd dismissed as impossible. Second, I would document everything. Not for the divorce proceedings, though it would certainly be useful there. For myself, a record of her deception, her contempt, the systematic betrayal she'd conducted while I remained, in her words, clueless. Third, I would prepare my exit. Separate finances, consult an attorney, ensure that when the confrontation came, I'd be ready to act rather than react. And fourth, the piece that gave me the most satisfaction to contemplate, I would let her continue believing she was in control. Let her think I suspected nothing, that her work-client camouflage was working, that she could finalize her logistics without interference. The surprise she wasn't expecting wouldn't be the discovery. It would be the response. The plumbing came together that week, almost miraculously. Cornelius had referred me to a plumber named Wallace, who, like him, was willing to consult rather than just do. Wallace spent an afternoon walking me through the venting requirements I'd misunderstood, explaining the logic behind the codes, helping me redesign my rough-in to pass inspection. "You've got the hardest part figured out," he said, as we reviewed my new plans. "The rest is just following through." Following through. That was exactly what I intended to do. The bathroom passed inspection on my next attempt. I celebrated alone in the basement, looking at the approved permit sticker, feeling something that had been missing from my life for years, genuine accomplishment. The law office of Winifred Calloway occupied the top floor of a building in uptown Charlotte. Winifred herself was in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and the calm demeanor of someone who'd navigated thousands of divorces without losing her equilibrium. She'd come recommended by a colleague at work whose own divorce had been contentious. Winifred had secured an outcome that seemed impossible given the circumstances. "Tell me about your situation," she said, after we'd exchanged pleasantries and settled into her conference room. I told her everything, the comparison to Gage, the secret texting, the photo at the coffee shop, the explicit messages I'd discovered on Ramona's phone, the plans they'd been making, the logistics they'd been calculating. Winifred took notes without visible reaction, her expression remaining neutral through revelations that still made me sick to recount. "North Carolina is an equitable distribution state," she said when I finished. "That doesn't mean 50-50, it means fair. Given the circumstances, her infidelity, the length of the marriage, your respective contributions, we can likely secure a favorable outcome." "No, what does favorable look like?" "The house, if you want it. A significant portion of joint assets, no alimony payments to her given the adultery." She paused. "North Carolina also recognizes claims for alienation of affection and criminal conversation. Those are civil suits you could bring against the third party, Gage Holloway in this case." "I can sue him." "You can. Whether you should is another question. These cases are difficult to win, expensive to pursue, and often result in outcomes that don't justify the effort. But the option exists." I thought about Gage, the furniture maker who'd stolen my wife, who'd participated in her deception, who'd referred to me as clueless in messages I'd never been meant to see. "I want to keep that option open." "Noted." Winifred made another notation. "In the meantime, my recommendation is to continue your current approach. Gather information, document the affair, prepare for the separation without alerting her. When you're ready to proceed, we'll have everything in place." "How long should I wait?" "That depends on what you want to accomplish. If your only goal is to end the marriage with favorable terms, we could proceed now. But if you want something more, psychological satisfaction, a particular kind of conclusion, then timing matters." I thought about the basement, almost finished. About the surprise Ramona wasn't expecting. "I'll be ready in about 6 weeks, I said. "Can we plan for that timeline?" "Absolutely. I'll prepare the paperwork and keep it ready." She studied me across the table. "Mr. Hendricks, I've represented many clients in situations like yours. Most of them react emotionally, understandably, given the betrayal. But you seem unusually composed, almost strategic. My wife thought I was incapable of surprising her. I intend to prove her wrong." Winifred smiled, the first real expression she'd shown since our meeting began. "I think you will." The final weeks of the basement project were the most intense of my life. I took 2 weeks of vacation from work, time I'd accumulated over years of dedication that now seemed foolish. Every day, I was in the basement by 7 a.m., working until late evening, pushing through the remaining tasks with a focus that bordered on obsession. The drywall went up, mudded and taped and sanded until the seams disappeared. I painted walls, installed trim, laid flooring. The bathroom fixtures arrived, and I installed them myself. Toilet, sink, shower, each one a small victory over the person I'd been 6 months earlier. The home theater took shape, built-in shelving I'd designed and constructed, wiring for speakers and a projector, a space that would have cost $20,000 to create professionally. The wet bar was the finishing touch, custom cabinetry I'd built from scratch, following YouTube tutorials and trial and error refinement. A small refrigerator and sink, storage for glasses and bottles, a counter made from butcher block I'd sanded and finished myself. When it was done, truly done, every detail complete, I stood in the center of the finished basement and felt tears forming in my eyes. I'd done this. Me. The man who couldn't change a tire without LA, who hired plumbers and contractors, who'd been dismissed as incapable of anything requiring actual effort. 2,000 square feet of finished living space, created from nothing through my own work. Every wall I'd framed, every wire I'd pulled, every pipe I'd fitted, every surface I'd finished. Ramona had told me Gage could renovate a basement by himself. Well, so could I. I scheduled the reveal for a Saturday evening in October, almost exactly a year after Ramona had started texting Gage, though she didn't know I was aware of that timeline. "I want to show you something," I told her that morning. Something I've been working on. She looked up from her coffee with an expression of distracted curiosity. Our interactions had become increasingly perfunctory over the past months. She was focused on her exit strategy. I was focused on mine, and the marriage between us had become a formality neither of us acknowledged. The basement? The finished basement. I'd like you to see it. Something flickered in her expression. Surprise, maybe, that I'd actually completed the project she dismissed as impossible. Okay, sure, tonight, around 7. And Ramona? I held her gaze. This is important to me. Please be on time. At 7 o'clock that evening, I led her down the stairs to the basement. The lights were off when we descended. I'd planned this moment, choreographed it like a theater production, wanting the full impact of the reveal. Ready? I asked. Fletcher, just turn on the lights. I hit the switch. The basement transformed from darkness into a space that could have been featured in a home design magazine. The theater area with its built-in shelving. The gym space with professional rubber flooring. The wet bar with its custom cabinetry, currently stocked with bottles and glasses. The bathroom visible through its open door, fully functional and finished. Ramona stood at the bottom of the stairs, silent, taking it in. I did all of this, I said. Every wall, every wire, every pipe. 6 months of work, from foundation to finish. She walked into the space slowly, running her hands over the shelving I'd built, the counter I'd finished, the trim I'd installed. This is incredible. You told me Gage could renovate a basement by himself. Do you remember that? She froze. Fletcher, you said he did everything himself, unlike me, that I was incapable of this kind of work. I was upset. I didn't mean... You meant exactly what you said, and I've spent 6 months proving you wrong. I walked to the wet bar, poured myself a drink from a bottle I'd placed there specifically for this moment. But that's not why I asked you down here tonight. Then why? I set down the glass, reached into my pocket, and pulled out the folded papers I'd been carrying for days. Because I know about Gage. I know about the texting, the meetings, the affair. I know you've been planning to leave me, calculating the logistics of your exit. Her face went pale. How did you... It doesn't matter how. What matters is that you were wrong about me, Ramona. Wrong to think I wouldn't figure it out. Wrong to think I'd be clueless. Wrong to think you were the only one with a plan. I handed her the papers. Those are divorce papers, already filed. My attorney says the terms are favorable to me, given the adultery. You'll want to have your own lawyer review them, of course. She stared at the papers without taking them. Fletcher, we can talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. You made your choices months ago. I'm just making mine now. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Winifred had been right about the favorable terms. I kept the house, including the basement I'd finished. Ramona received a fair distribution of other assets, but no alimony. The documented adultery had eliminated that possibility. She also received the certain knowledge that her carefully planned exit had been anticipated and countered. I didn't sue Gage Holloway in the end. The alienation of affection claim would have been expensive to pursue and uncertain in outcome. More importantly, I didn't need external validation of what had been done to me. I knew that was enough. Ramona moved out within a week of being served with papers. She was staying with Gage, according to the mutual acquaintances who felt compelled to share such information. They were living together now, presumably building furniture and renovating basements in a domestic bliss founded on betrayal. I wished them well. Not sincerely, I'm not that evolved, but with the philosophical acceptance that comes from knowing you've done everything you could. The house felt different without her. Not empty. I'd learned during the basement project that I was capable of filling my own space, creating my own satisfaction. But different. The absence of another person changes the acoustics of a home, the feel of rooms, the quality of silence. I spent the first few weeks after she left completing small projects I'd neglected during the divorce proceedings, fixing things, improving things, maintaining the space I'd fought to keep. The skills I'd developed in the basement translated to the rest of the house. I was becoming genuinely handy, genuinely capable, genuinely the person Ramona had claimed I could never be. Ironic that I became that person only after she was gone. Spring came slowly that year, with false starts and late frosts and the uncertain weather that makes Charlotte feel caught between seasons. I was sitting in the basement one evening, my basement now, the space I'd built, when I received a text from an old friend I hadn't spoken to in months. Heard about the divorce. Sorry, man. How are you holding up? The friend was Quinn Hollister, someone I'd known since college who drifted to the periphery of my life during my marriage. Ramona hadn't liked him, had considered him a bad influence, though I'd never understood why, and I'd gradually stopped making the effort to maintain the friendship. Holding up okay, I replied. It's been hard, but I'm getting through it. Want to grab a beer sometime, catch up? I looked around the basement at the home theater setup I rarely used, the wet bar where I drank alone, the gym equipment that had become my primary social outlet. Yeah, I replied. I'd like that. Quinn and I met at a brewery in Southend the following Saturday. He looked the same. Receding hairline, easy smile, the slightly disheveled appearance of someone who'd never quite figured out adult fashion. But his conversation was different than I remembered. More substantive, more interested in actual connection rather than superficial banter. I followed what happened through the grapevine, he said after we'd ordered. Ramona and that furniture guy. Brutal, man. It was what it was. You seem remarkably calm about it. I've had time to process, and honestly, by the time I found out about the affair, I'd already started suspecting the marriage was over. The discovery was just confirmation. Quinn nodded slowly. So what's next? Dating apps? Focusing on work? I don't know yet. I've been focused on the house, actually. Finished the basement myself, full renovation from concrete to completed. Yourself? Like, personally? Every wall, every wire, every pipe. He sat back, visibly impressed. The Fletcher I knew in college couldn't change a light bulb. The Fletcher you knew in college hadn't been told he was incapable of anything. Amazing what motivation can do. Is that what it was? Motivation. Partly. And partly, I searched for the right words. I needed to prove something. To myself, not to her. That I could do more than I'd been doing. That the limitations I'd accepted weren't actually real. Quinn raised his glass. Well, here's to limitations being imaginary. We clinked glasses, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Genuine social connection. Not the performative interaction of work colleagues, or the awkward exchanges with mutual friends navigating the post-divorce social landscape. Just two people talking, sharing, being present with each other. It was a start. I met Ingrid at a home improvement store of all places. I was there for materials, always materials these days, always another project, and she was struggling with a flatbed cart loaded with lumber. The cart had a stuck wheel, the lumber was threatening to slide, and she was clearly losing the battle. Can I help? She looked up at me with an expression caught between gratitude and skepticism. I've almost got it. You almost have the opposite of got it. I took the cart handle. Where are you headed? The checkout, and then my truck. And then home, where I'll apparently spend the weekend reminding myself why I thought building a fence was a good idea. You're building a fence yourself. Trying to. I watched some YouTube videos. How hard can it be? I thought about myself 6 months earlier, standing in an empty basement, asking the same question. It depends on the fence, and your tolerance for frustration. I guided the cart toward the checkout. I'm Fletcher, by the way. Ingrid. The conversation continued in the parking lot, where I helped her load the lumber into her truck. She was building a privacy fence for her backyard, a straightforward project, but with enough potential complications to trip up a beginner. The post holes are the key, I found myself saying. Most people don't dig deep enough. You want at least a third of the post underground, more in our climate because of the freeze-thaw cycle. You know a lot about fences. I know a lot about learning things the hard way. I hesitated, then made a decision. I could help if you want, not do it for you, teach you while you do it. She studied me for a moment, assessing. I wondered what she saw, The divorced guy with sawdust on his jeans, offering assistance to a stranger for reasons he couldn't quite articulate. Why would you do that? Because someone helped me when I was learning. It made a difference. The assessment continued, then resolved into a smile. Okay, Saturday morning I'll provide coffee and my complete incompetence. I'll provide expertise and patience. I pulled out my phone. Give me your address. Ingrid's backyard was a disaster of optimism. She'd marked out the fence line with string, mostly correct, though she'd missed a jog in the property line, and had assembled tools and materials with the eager confusion of someone who'd learned everything from videos and nothing from experience. "Where do I start?" she asked as I surveyed the scene. "With coffee, then with adjusting this string." I pointed to the property line discrepancy. "You'll want to check with the surveyor's markers before you build, or you'll end up in a dispute with your neighbor." "There are surveyor's markers. Usually, let's find them." We spent the morning on preparation, finding property lines, adjusting layouts, discussing the logic behind fence construction in ways that YouTube tutorials never bothered to explain. Ingrid was a quick learner, asking good questions, absorbing information with the particular hunger of someone who genuinely wanted to understand. "You're good at this," she said during a break for more coffee. "Teaching, I mean. I'm learning to be. When I started my own project, I had to figure everything out from tutorials and consultants. It would have been easier with someone who could explain the why, not just the what." "What project?" I told her about the basement. The whole story, including Ramona and the comparison to Gage and the determination to prove something I couldn't quite name. "So you renovated an entire basement by yourself because your wife said you couldn't?" "Partly, but also because I'd forgotten who I was. What I could do. I'd gotten comfortable, like she said. The basement was how I remembered." Ingrid was quiet for a moment, looking at me with an expression I couldn't interpret. "That's one of the best stories I've ever heard," she said finally. "It's also a divorce story, which is generally a red flag for new acquaintances. I'm divorced too, 4 years now." She shrugged. "We're allowed to be complicated." The fence took 3 weekends to complete. By the end, Ingrid could set posts, cut boards, use a level with confidence. She understood the principles behind fence construction, not just the mechanics. She'd built something permanent and functional, something that would stand for decades as evidence of her capability. And somewhere in those 3 weekends, something else had developed between us. Not romance, exactly, or not yet, but connection, understanding. The particular intimacy that comes from working alongside someone, sharing effort and frustration and eventual triumph. On the last day, after the final board was nailed and we stood back to admire the completed fence, Ingrid turned to me. "I want to take you to dinner as thanks." "You don't have to." "I want to, not because I have to." She held my gaze. "Is that okay?" I thought about the past year, the betrayal, the divorce, the rebuilding of myself through physical labor and learned skills. I thought about Ramona and her comparisons, her contempt, her certainty that I was incapable of anything that mattered. I thought about who I'd become since then. "Yes," I said. "That's okay." 6 months later, I sold the house in Charlotte. Not because I needed to, the divorce settlement had left me financially secure, but because the house represented something I was ready to move past. Every room held memories of Ramona, of our marriage, of the years I'd spent being less than I could be. The basement was harder to leave. I'd built that space myself, transformed it from concrete and ductwork into something beautiful and functional. But even the basement was connected to the person I'd been building against, the comparison I'd been trying to disprove. I was tired of being defined by reaction, ready to be defined by choice. Ingrid and I found a house together, a fixer-upper in a transitional neighborhood south of the city. It needed everything: new roof, updated electrical, kitchen renovation, bathroom repairs, the kind of comprehensive project that would have terrified the Fletcher of 2 years ago. Now it excited me. We moved in on a Saturday in September, exactly 2 years after Ramona had told me her ex did everything himself, unlike me. The timing wasn't deliberate, but I appreciated the symmetry. The house was chaos, boxes everywhere, furniture in wrong rooms, the particular disorder that comes with combining two lives into one space. Ingrid and I worked through the afternoon, unpacking and organizing and arguing good-naturedly about where things should go. By evening, we'd made enough progress to stop. We sat on the porch of our new home, drinking wine from glasses we'd only just found, looking at the neighborhood we'd chosen to rebuild. "I got an email today," Ingrid said, breaking a comfortable silence. "From my ex. He heard I'd moved in with someone. And? He wanted to warn me, said he'd looked you up, found some old social media stuff from your marriage. Said you seemed average and uninspiring." I laughed. "He's not wrong about who I was. I told him he was looking at old data, that people change. Do you believe that? That people really change?" Ingrid turned to face me. "I believe you did. I've seen the evidence. The basement. Not just the basement, the way you teach things instead of just doing them, the way you approach problems, patient, methodical, willing to learn." She took my hand. "The way you love. No ego, no competition, just genuine care. That's generous. It's accurate." She squeezed my hand. "Your ex-wife told you her ex could do things you couldn't. She was wrong. Not because you learned to do those things, but because the things that matter aren't fences and basements. What are they? Showing up every day, putting in the effort to become better, building something real with someone who sees you clearly." I thought about Ramona's comparison, the words that had started everything. "My ex does everything himself, unlike you." She'd meant it as criticism, as proof of my inadequacy, but she'd been measuring the wrong things. That night I dreamed about the basement, not the finished version, the empty one, concrete floor, exposed ductwork, the raw potential of unfinished space. In the dream, I was standing in the center, tools in hand, ready to begin. But this time, I wasn't alone. Ingrid was there, and so were others, faces I didn't recognize, people who might be friends or family or students of skills I hadn't yet learned to teach. We were building something together, something larger than a basement, larger than any single project. When I woke, Ingrid was still sleeping beside me, and sunlight was filtering through windows that needed replacing. I got up quietly, went downstairs, and started making a list of everything our house needed. The work would take months, maybe years. I couldn't wait to begin. Ramona never saw the basement after that night I showed her. I heard later, through the channels that always seem to carry such news, that she and Gage had broken up after about a year together. Something about irreconcilable differences, incompatible expectations. She'd discovered, apparently, that a man who could build furniture wasn't necessarily a man who could build a life. I didn't feel satisfaction at the news, just a quiet recognition that some lessons have to be learned firsthand. My ex had told me Gage did everything himself. What she never understood was that doing everything yourself isn't the same as doing what matters. What matters is building something with someone else, not from competition or comparison, but from choice, from love, from the shared effort of two people who've decided to become more than they were alone. That's what I learned in the basement. That's what I'm still learning every day in the house Ingrid and I are building together. The surprise Ramona never imagined wasn't my capability. It was my capacity for change, and it happened not because of her comparison, but despite it.